your Google account just got pwned. And you didn't even click a link. What are you supposed to do? Today, we're talking about account takeovers. Over 2.5 billion attempts per day. So what you can do to stay safe.
This is the DTF Cyber Podcast. I'm Damian.
This is Troy.
And it's your boy, Fern. Let's go! Now, I don't know if I should admit this. Because let me be clear, guys. This is not an invitation. But I don't think I've ever been pwned before. So either I'm very secure or I'm very lucky. I'm gonna go with lucky, but yeah, I've never had I've had it where people that I know, like for example, on like Facebook, because I'm a boomer, and that's the only social media I have outside of LinkedIn. I have had people message me, and it's like, oh, this is clearly a scam. I've had family where I've received videos from them asking for stuff, like log into this and sign up for that. And then I just message them and I say, hey, like, what is this? And like, that's not me. Someone took my account and they're making videos of me asking for stuff from like family and friends.
Wow, that's real. Really? Like, I didn't think that was actually happening that wide scale. Like, I know it does happen. We've seen it in the news where there's a CEO, for example, of a big company where AI is just using their face or their voice, but never heard of that happening from family member to family member.
All right, so here's my theory. It may have happened, it may have not have happened. Either so, the person that was affected by this either was really actually trying to get people to sign up for the scam because they were going to get paid for it, and then they were too embarrassed to admit they actually kind of fell into the trap on their own, or it was AI. I'm going to go with the first one because I don't think nothing about what I saw led me to believe that it was some sort of malicious actor doing anything. I just think the person got embarrassed, and then when they got, hey, like, what is this? They're like, oopsies.
Well, not to say it doesn't happen, right? I don't know if I've actually seen it. Maybe, maybe there are cases of it. I've seen people post on YouTube and LinkedIn that this happens. I just haven't seen it firsthand. Other than, like I said, business leaders being impersonated, but not family members. I know there were cases where grandma will get a phone call and it sounds like the grandchild that's in trouble. Maybe they're in Mexico and they need bail money, and so the scammers are kind of using this urgency and this voice to try to get money out of grandma. I've heard a lot of those cases. Kind of scary. But the account takeover stuff is kind of different. Like you mentioned, you don't have a bunch of social media, but let's just say Google. You probably use a Google account. How difficult would that be for you if you lost access to your Google account or to your cell phone from SIM swapping, your cell phone provider account? Think about that. How difficult would that be?
I think it'd be pretty difficult if the Google account was compromised. Probably not as much. I think it'd be annoying. What I mostly have is a lot of everything set up on my phone.
So more pain if you lost your phone physically?
Yeah, because a lot of stuff is tied to my phone number, and then a lot of stuff is tied to the biometrics on my phone, the password account stuff. So yeah, I would say the phone is probably would be the most irritating. If someone had the Google account, that'd be annoying too. But I think if I were to choose maximum pain, I'd probably say the cell phone would be more painful than.
Yeah, but you're talking about physical cell phone. What if you lost, like, let's say you have your physical cell phone, but somebody did a SIM swap. Now you got no service, and somebody's got your phone number. So all of your MFA that you use through SMS, that's all gone. You can't get into your bank accounts. You can't get into any service that relies on that SMS.
Oh yeah, that'd be really annoying. I was gonna say, if I don't have service, I can always get Wi-Fi. But yeah, if they're texting right through like the number, then yeah, that'd be unfortunate.
I don't know. What about you, Troy? What account would be the most painful
it's
for you?
incredibly difficult to kind of get your life back once somebody takes over your accounts. And I think we see this on the rise through phishing, but could be on the phone, could be via email. But I have seen so many people call me and say, how do I get my Instagram page back? Or how do I get my, Facebook, LinkedIn, and so on, because it's been compromised. And there's not really a great way to get to these companies quickly when you're panicking that somebody has access to your account, especially if they're impersonating you or posting things that are unbecoming of what you're doing. As an example, we do see that quite a lot. I wish there was a service that could say, come to us and we can help you get your accounts back, and just be a person that you could talk to, and they could actually interface with all your software vendors. But I don't think we have that yet. But my point is, I've talked to so many people. They've had their iTunes account taken over, their Apple account, or their Google account, as you said, Damian. Those are kind of your key accounts, because a lot of the downstream, single sign-on or multi-factor kind of originates from your Google account or from your Apple account. And when those two big accounts are popped, it could lead into so many things. Could be your bank account, could be your social media, could be your email, and so on. So there's a lot of danger there with the account takeovers. And from the statistics that we've seen recently, they're definitely on the rise, and they're being more successful because they're enabled by AI. The threat actors are using targeting and reconnaissance through artificial intelligence to find out everything about us and poise this phishing message that is custom tailored to their victim. And it looks very legitimate. It looks like it's coming from a legitimate person. And so it's very difficult to spot that fake sometimes. And we all fall for it. Now, knock on wood, as Fern says, I have not, but I'm sure that the day is coming that a fish will get to me as well. So nobody's immune. You got to know what to do when the bad things happen.
Yeah, I had one account taken over, but it wasn't. I mean, it was heartbreaking because it was one of the really early ICQ numbers. Remember ICQ? Did you guys ever use that as a messaging app? Early internet days?
Nope.
No, before your time, Fern. Yeah, so
I might have been in diapers.
So that was like one of the early
not that old yet, no.
messaging apps where I had a really early number, and I had a really good number, and used it for a number of years. And towards the end of that, that service, somebody had taken over my account, which wasn't, it wasn't the end of the world for me, but I could imagine, if somebody, if that service turned into, what WhatsApp is today, or any major messaging system, I probably want that number back, because they would associate you based off of your account number. But nowadays, people use Google, like you said, Troy, for really just the big identity ecosystem. So you may use your Google credentials to log into a third-party app. And people use this because it's a lot easier. You don't have to remember, multiple passwords. You don't have to go put them into a password vault. You essentially just click on the Google link, or the Facebook link, or the Apple link, and use those credentials to log in to these services. Now, if your Google account gets popped, you lose access to whatever you had tied into this whole ecosystem. So that's the pain point for most users in their personal lives. But let's, what about from the enterprise level? Are we worried about account takeovers? I think that's a really good question, right? Because we do have obviously online identities and accounts that could be compromised and taken over, and we do see that happening in the news.
Yeah, I think definitely, as we're talking about personal identities taken over through account takeover, in the business world, I think that's far more common. I think you deal with that in a large company at least once or twice a week, where an employee clicks on a fish and all of a sudden their MFA is bypassed through some kind of trickery. We saw threat actors become very, skilled at this. They would basically send an email into a company that the company was expecting, or from a victim that had been, compromised downstream. And so the employee would click on the link. It would open up a OneDrive link. And so the employee would actually put their credentials in. That's the threat actor capturing those credentials. And then they would get the prompt for the MFA. And of course, they had just done this action. So they're like, yeah, I did that. Click yes, let them in. And now the threat actor has access into that, O365 account. What they do is they capture that token at the time of compromise. And now they have this little piece of token instead of a username and password that keeps the door open. Let's say, even if the user resets their password, that token still keeps the door open to that O365 account until the administrator, disables the account, revokes that token, and issues a new one to the employee, the threat actor will continue to have access to that account. We saw many, many times across many organizations where they thought the threat actor was eradicated because they forced a password change, but the bad actors still had that token access, and they were still grabbing documents and emails and all the stuff that you do not want them to have access to until you actually do that token reset. So I think account takeover in the business world is far more common and could be far more dangerous depending on the different information, the intellectual property, the trade secrets, the company data that is accessible to these threat actors. And what they do is they sit there, they listen for financial information coming in, an invoice that needs to be paid, something that they are expecting in from a vendor, etc. And then they'll go in and ask that vendor to change bank accounts or ask your accounts payable to change the bank account to the vendor, etc. And they'll sit in the middle and they'll siphon off that money. Thousands and thousands of dollars go out the door every single day due to this account takeover scheme that is very popular and widely used.
Well, there's just more money in a business than more individuals, most individuals anyways, right? So that's why businesses are a higher target. But you touched on a bunch of things there, Troy. Like one of the things I wanted to talk about today would be MFA fatigue. I think that is one aspect of this, because how many times do you get that MFA or maybe click here to approve? You get them a number of times and you kind of either click approve or you ignore them. That fatigue plays into this a lot. And so, you may think, okay, we have MFA, we're good. Part of the problem there is if your users are being bombarded with these MFA requests or the approvals on their mobile device, they kind of ignore them and just click OK to get it off their screen. And right there, that's a huge problem.
Real quick, Tammy, I wanted to say that, if you're an administrator and you have MFA across 100% of your O365 accounts, good for you, first of all. Second of all, you should be running a script every night that looks for accounts that don't have MFA, because what we find is that administrators will set up accounts sometimes that'll be outside of our normal procedures, and you'll find an account that's sitting out there without MFA, or you'll find that some reason a user's MFA was disabled because they needed to do something quickly, and an administrator actually disabled MFA for that account and it's still disabled. And we used to find at many different organizations I worked at where MFA was disabled on accounts and you just weren't aware of it. So we ended up having to run a script that would look every single night to see if any accounts did not have MFA, so that you believe you have 100% MFA, but then you find out these accounts don't. So making sure that you do that accountability.
Yeah, then you let down another path with the tokens, right? Because I think one way we kind of got away from the MFA fatigue was to back off and allow the tokens to live for, let's say, a few days or even a few weeks for some organizations. So in your case, Troy, you may have MFA turned on, but the token, it might live for too long of a period that allows a window for attackers to potentially get in, steal that token, and have access for a week or 2 weeks into that system.
That's right. And in our user education too, and if you're listening to this, if you're getting MFA prompts that you did not initiate, that is a red flag. You need to be telling your IT administrators immediately. We tried to push that out in every piece of, education that we did, whether it's user awareness training or annual compliance training, whatever it was, that, this MFA, if you get a push that you did not request, that's a problem. Let somebody know right away, because that could be someone trying to take over your account. But you're exactly right. Users just get fatigued with all these MFA pushes, and all of a sudden they accidentally click yes. Now, we also saw where it was not just an MFA push from the application. It was a phone call. Sometimes you allow a phone call verification and somebody accidentally pushes 1 to allow, which is, I don't know how somebody accidentally says yes to something on a phone call, but it happened all the time. And employees could not recall why they pushed 1, but they did. So make sure you turn off, telephone 2-factor if you have that ability in your environment, because that is a big risk as well, because people can accidentally push the wrong button in a phone call and allow bad actors into their account and not think twice about it.
Yeah, that push acknowledgement is just too easy. But most users will complain when they have to enter in a 6-digit code. So it's a convenience versus risk. Again, we talk about that all the time. Is it going to be more convenient for the user, or are we introducing a higher level of risk at that point? But Fern, one of the things I wanted to ask you too, right? We talked about banking, personal banking, and having those push SMS, MFA to your phone. One of the things I've noticed, and you mentioned use Facebook. Have you ever gotten a Facebook message or text saying, here's your authentication for your password reset?
I've got all kinds of random stuff. So when Troy was talking about the phone situation, like the call to verify and pressing 1, I've had it where I've gotten emails saying something to the extent of you just requested this change. And my first thought was, no, I didn't. And so I look at it, and then you kind of realize that it's actually not real. So it's like, so I've had it essentially where in most cases, if you change a password or if you change a setting, for example, on like whatever account, you might just get a message saying, hey, you know, we noticed that you made this change. Let us know if you didn't. If you didn't, click here, right? And I've gotten those just out of the blue where obviously I'm like, oh, then I didn't do that. But if I look at it a little bit further, I can kind of tell that it wasn't actually real.
Well, there are real ones.
Well, yeah.
So there are people, like if they get your email address, or I have a really easy email address, right? I had one of the really early Gmail accounts. So I'm not going to obviously tell you what it is here. You know what it is, you know what it is. But if let's say, for example, if you had a really easy one, and people just tried it, they would put it in and say, hey, this is a real account. Do you want to reset the password? Send the email for the password reset. And I would get a ton of these password reset requests on that account because the email address was just too easy. So that's one of the downsides of having, just like a phone number. If you had a really easy phone number, how many people would accidentally call that thinking it was a pizza place? Because usually most restaurants would have or lawyer offices would have the really easy phone numbers. And by the way, my Las Vegas phone number, I still get phone calls for a lawyer's office, even though I've had it for the past 15 years.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I get it every so often, but usually it's not because of an account is easy email. It's just more so people just trying to pop me. I've been lucky enough to know enough, I say, to kind of look into it. I've been where I've got emails with a DocuSign saying thanks for this transaction. Like, no, that wasn't me. There's just a lot of things where it's like, yeah, that wasn't me. So I just know better than to click on it. But I think what they take advantage of is a lot of curiosity, or people kind of fight or flight mentality, where it's like, oh, thanks for your order. Like, well, who spent my money, right? But I've never really got anything where I've been scammed, I guess, or pwned. So I don't know. I think there's just a lot of options for people to try and take advantage of the situation. But because we talk about security, and because I know a little bit before we started talking about it here, I've just been maybe fortunate, right? So, but not everyone has sort of that exposure that obviously you guys have, or even me to a lesser extent. But I was wondering, when you say tokens, right? Is there not like a standard for like recycling your tokens?
Oh, that's a tricky topic. That's a really there are obviously, there's best practices, obviously. I do see part of the problem though is that we have, if we talk about OAuth tokens, right, in the Google ecosystem, and I mentioned this on a previous episode, if you just go back and check how many OAuth tokens you have authorized inside of your personal Gmail and Google ecosystem, how many people actually do that? And so if you look at, organizations and businesses, best practice is to go back and inventory those. The challenge with that is sometimes you see these tokens, you have no idea what they are because they're not properly labeled. And you're kind of scared as an administrator to go and disable a token and take down, let's say, communications for the executives or from your CEO. And so that's part of the challenge that we face on the enterprise level. But again, right, I'll reiterate this, that I said this, I can't remember what episode. Go and look at your personal tokens within whether it's Microsoft or Google, and see what you've already authorized within your personal accounts. Because when's the last time you actually inventoried that? Organizations have it just on a much, much bigger scale. You should do it, but it's right now it's not easy. So you could create that gap for attackers to steal tokens. I mean, if we take a look at in the news recently, we just had some issues with tokens for Salesforce, right? I don't know if you guys read the news over the past couple of weeks, but that was one of the things where you have a third, like a business to business integration. We talked about the SalesLoft one, right? So there's these same attacks happening where users or attackers are taking advantage of these tokens.
I was listening to another podcast. I thought it was interesting how they described it. They say kind of like the key part to identity is you have to be able to establish identity for people to do what they need to do, but it also has to be able to prevent people from doing things you don't want them to do. And I thought that was interesting because it's a very short, way of describing identity, but most people aren't in the office. Most people aren't going in to do things, right? In a controlled environment. I don't know for you, Damian, but how many people that are on your side are remote, right? I know there's a lot of international people, so there's just like so many opportunities for people to be in an environment that isn't as secure as like maybe a traditional office was 10, 15 years ago. But that leads me to a question of, is it harder to, like for you guys or for any sort of enterprise, is it harder to kind of establish identity now in like today's world versus what it was 10, 15 years ago?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's an easy one. That's an easy one to answer because 10, 15 years ago, we didn't have as much cloud to cloud or SaaS to SaaS integrations. And so now you have probably way more service accounts, way more third-party integrations that rely on these non-human identities. And 10 to 15 years ago, we didn't have as many non-human identities. We did have them because we had service accounts, but we didn't have identities that would go across from cloud to cloud, for example. And so these are only going to become much more difficult to manage because think about agentic AI. Where are you going to do? What are you going to do with all these AI agents that are out there? Can you create identities for them and make sure they have access to the right things at the right time? And how do you inventory those? So yeah, it will get more complicated as we go. But if you look at where we are today, it's certainly much more difficult than it was 10 years ago.
But then that leads me to like, how do you actually defend against that, right? Now versus before is obviously a lot different. I have seen a few things where people are looking for passwordless. I've seen it where people are using a lot of QR codes. So like even for example, Netflix, if you sign into a new TV, you just scan the QR code, right? You don't have to actually have your password as part of that. So I don't know if that necessarily counts as passwordless, but a lot of the streaming services have it where you go to sign in, and if you have an account, you can choose to scan from your phone, right? And then that, I imagine, uses some form of token that your phone has set up with your streaming service, like Netflix, for example, or like Disney Plus. But that's for a streaming service, right? That's not necessarily to get into any sort of corporate tools. So where should people start today if they're kind of trying to do their best to prevent these account takeovers on the enterprise level?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Fern. I think that there's so many different places in a journey that everybody's at. It's hard to say, definitively, here's where you should start. Honestly, that identity space is so fractured and so siloed where you have non-human identities, employees' identities, you have SaaS application identities, you have administrator identities, privileged access, et cetera. There's so many components to identity, which is why it continues to be the number one, focus area for most CISOs out there. So I think that the number one thing that I always tell people in any situation is inventory and visibility. You got to know what you have before you can protect it. So finding all those different types of accounts I just mentioned through some tool, a non-human identity tool or an identity tool, being able to discover all the different identities you have in your environment. Number one. Number two is, being able to track that visibility of, who has access to what. There's so many great tools coming out right now in the AI space that are using artificial intelligence to help do the things I just mentioned, plus a lot of the other correlation of disparate pieces of information of access. So, the one thing that I would highly recommend is identity is the foundation for a zero trust model. If you really want to go to zero trust, you have to map out the roles and responsibilities and entitlements of your identities. And to do that, you have to know what you're dealing with. That's the identification and the constant visibility of what these accounts are doing over time is so crucial to the success of any cybersecurity program. Because if you look at the number of breaches that are or have a percentage of identity in them, it's very high. It's almost 90% of attacks have something to do with the identity of a human or non-human that have been a part of that breach. So it is crucial to get it done and crucial to be the foundation of your zero trust model. But as you were saying earlier, if you think about the McDonald's app as an example, what we call is just-in-time access, right? As I drive up to McDonald's, open the app, I get a 4-digit code. That code is assigned to me. It's just for a short period of time at that geolocation. And it tells that McDonald's that it's Troy's account, and he gets the points, and it uses this credit card that he has on file with us. It's very convenient for me, but it's also secure because it's only there for a limited time, and it's only allowed to my app on my phone with that token. So that's one. My daughter's logged into Roblox last night on the PS5 in the living room. And they did it by just going to their Roblox account on their iPad and finding a 6-digit code, putting that in, and automatically open Roblox on my PS5. So I guess as we look at your Netflix example, I think we're going to see more and more of that just-in-time, geographically associated QR codes or 6-digit codes that you're going to be able to go device to device. When I'm traveling for work, as an example, go to a hotel room, you open Netflix, you can just hit the QR code and it validates my account on my phone, and then it pops up on the TV. So I think we're getting a lot more convenient there and a lot more secure with just-in-time access, because I think it's a lot harder for threat actors to get in the middle of that short-term access grant than it is to take an account over with email.
Yeah, my problem with that, because I get those on the TV as well. I rarely log in though, because I'm scared of, one, what can the hotel see? Even though it's obviously YouTube or Netflix or some streaming device. I don't want anyone to have access to my credentials or even viewing history, things like that. But when you leave, are the credentials really wiped, or are they cached in there where somebody can go and grab those credentials and start using your account? So I rarely, I guess I'm just really ultra paranoid. I rarely log into the TV. If anything, I'll just watch it from my computer or my phone without having to go and log into another device.
Well, what I was thinking is, Troy said the number one thing that people are looking to do is establish identity, right? And you talked about essentially mapping these items to services, right? So I just want to bring up, because it was in the news recently, that maybe this is a really good topic too, where ServiceNow was looking to acquire Vesa, right? And I think that's interesting because there's a lot of organizations that rely on ServiceNow. One as like a not a CRM, as like their ITSM play, right? Or any sort of like service desk, a lot of related things in there, even like asset inventory. And ServiceNow even has a few integrations with a few like asset discovery tools that you can even buy on their marketplace, as an example. But I think it's interesting to where now you see ServiceNow as this, we'll say, behemoth of a provider or a service that people can buy. And now they're kind of going after the identity space with Vesa, right? So kind of just, I guess, adding on to what you're saying there is like linking those two together is very important, right? And I think ServiceNow kind of sees the writing on the wall, but I don't know if you guys have anything to add to that, but I did see that recently in the news. So
yeah, that was a week ago. I don't know if it's real or not, or if it's a rumor. But obviously, ServiceNow is entering into the AI space, right? Agentic AI space where they have these agents. You mentioned service desk, but a lot of that stuff can be automated. I think one of the problems you have in that model is that you don't know, like I said, where these AI agents are and what they have access to. So, partnering or acquiring a company like Vesa would probably give them that visibility and potentially control their AI agents a little bit better. But that's acknowledgement that, hey, we're in that spot for technology where we're going to have this explosion of, non-human identities. How do we make sure that we have the right access for them, and we can go back and remove their access when it's no longer needed? So, if you're going to these hotels and you're logging into your Netflix account, how do you make sure that it is wiped and that TV or that device doesn't have access to your accounts anymore? Most people leave. I think there isn't the option to go and wipe the device or wipe your credentials. I don't know if I necessarily trust it, but most people leave the hotel room and don't even log out. So that's that's the same problem we have with these AI agents. As they spawn, we're going to have millions of them. What do they have access to and continued access to? So back to the whole token conversation. Are your tokens alive for a day? Are they alive for a week or months? When's the last time you physically logged into your Google account? That's a big question, right? When does that token expire?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes never, right? I don't even remember last time I logged into my Google account. So maybe I should go check that right now.
Absolutely. I always hit log out before I leave the hotel room. And, you can always see, like Damian, you mentioned a couple episodes ago, to check your Google to see what you've actually authorized to use your Google account to log into. And it's a good idea to do an inventory of that every now and again. But I can tell you that the Google token stays alive as long as you want it to. There's no time limit on that. So unless you change your password, those tokens stay active.
Yeah, that also goes with offboarding employees, for example. So if you're, you have a token that's live for Google or Microsoft, even Slack, because you don't log into these tools every day. You think about how frustrating that would be for a user. Every morning I boot up my computer, I got to relog into, the 10 different apps I got to use for that day. And I got to do that every single morning. That's kind of frustrating. And so the tokens actually help with that. The problem though is if you offboard a user and they're no longer with your organization, are those tokens still alive? And that's something you got to go back and review, because even though you terminated the employee, and let's say it's a hostile termination, then the employee is going to be upset. Do they still have access to their email through these tokens on their phone, personal phone? Do they have access to Slack? Right? So these are things to think about as you're trying to control identity and access to your organization.
You know what's going to be wild? And I think people have to think about it real soon, is with all the non-human identities and just identity in general, or AI related identities, is how much those are going to cost to license, right? Because if every person has a identity, right? Do you consider NHI as part of that, as like a user, or like agentic identities, right? I don't know. Have you guys seen that already with some of your stuff?
Yeah, for now, I think they're treating them like machine identities as it relates to integrating API keys. So, as an example, if you have a ServiceNow or similar, and you create a ticket, but you need to also put some information into Salesforce because you want to update the customer record, you tie Salesforce and ServiceNow together through an API, and then you have the agent doing the updates. So that's an agentic AI, kind of like a machine identity, not a person, but there's not a license per se for that, and it's the license for connecting the software via API. So it's licensed differently than a human today, but we could see that change for sure, especially as you can spin up more and more AI identities as you have to scale, kind of like the elastic load balancing for Amazon, right? When you have servers that get overloaded, they just build more servers just like it. It could do the same thing with that agentic AI to spawn multiple agents as needed. How do you license those ephemeral identities, and how do you track the usage? That's going to be a challenge for us in the future, I believe, too, Fern.
Yeah, because it's not like these companies are there to help you save money, right? So you got to make a few bucks, right? So I was thinking about that, where if someone has their their own account, their own AD account, right? Typically, like with a Microsoft, you're going to pay for that, and you get everything as part of their package. But if it's identity related and you have like a 10-to-1 ratio of 10 identities to like a person, not unique, but like being used right by a person for different things, seems like it could spiral out of control if people are being charged for those at some point.
Well, they're not tied to a person, right? I think it's a different licensing model because these are treated like an API. So I think with a lot of these services, they'll charge you for API access. You may have an agentic agent that has access to the API and leverages that. You don't actually need an actual, licensed account most times. But part of the problem is how do you wouldn't necessarily associate back to an individual person. You would associate it back to the company, and then the company would have to, inventory these agents to say this is that agent's responsibility. And so trying to inventory that based off of capabilities, that's the challenge, right? You're gonna have to go out there and say, I have X number of AI agents that can do customer service, for example. So it's customer service AI agent that sits within ServiceNow, and they have access to Salesforce to grab information about the customer or about the user. So I can populate the ticket and get information, be smarter about it. Here's the problem though. If one of those agents gets compromised, does that give you access to everything inside of Salesforce and all your customer data? Right. So that's the challenge that we're facing today is that, yeah, we have to know about these agents, but we also have to know what the agents have access to. And how long should they have access to that data within Salesforce?
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess maybe I'm just pessimistic when I think of the way that companies can try and find a way to, squeeze juice out of a raisin. And I see that as being one opportunity where it's like, well, now you have to pay for this, right? If you want to get all this productivity out of a person or maybe our tool, right, you have to pay for that.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you think it should be free?
Hell yeah. Well, it depends on who you ask, right?
So let's flip it around, right? If it's free, the problem though is the provider that you're accessing through these API, they're going to get hit harder, right? So there's charges for that API access and also data transfer and compute. So if you're hitting, let's say, a big database on the Salesforce side, all your data is there. Yeah, that's, you want to have access to that data, but think about the cost for them to provide that data to you. There's some overhead. So you couldn't like 10x the access and compute required to do all these queries because it would cost them on the back end to provide that to you. So there has to be, in my mind, there has to be an upcharge of some sort because you're going to be more efficient. You're going to be accessing data a lot faster, and you're going to be querying a lot more within that data set. So there has to be some balance.
Okay. Well, you manage a budget, right? So if someone were to come to you in this case, we're just going to say a tool that you're using or your team has to use, and they're going to get like a productivity boost. Like, in your mind, what are you willing to pay for that? Like, how do you even decide?
That's a good question because it's not a direct science, but if you break it down for simplicity, if you're going to get a productivity boost, what is that productivity boost? Because if you get 10 times more productivity for 2 times additional cost, that's a business decision. So I can spend double, but I get 10 times more back in return. I think most businesses would say, hey, that's a pretty good investment.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I'm already seeing the pricing models when we sign up for Slack or some of these other AI agent type programs, Salesforce and others, where it already has, like, if you want the pro version, you get these things and it costs. So I'm already seeing companies trying to figure that out. If you remember the big SIM company from 10 years ago, they changed their model from perpetual to volume based to, core based. There was a big mess on trying to price that service, and it really drove users away. And I hope that we can avoid that here, where these AI companies are like, we got to make money to pay for that compute and storage and database, all that stuff. But then they just take advantage of the users or the people paying, and it becomes untenable. And now we're like, well, we would love to have that AI feature, but it's just too much money to invest. So I think there's a fine balance here. I'm sure every company that we're talking about here is already sitting down in their boardrooms trying to figure that out, what the balance is, what the customer can pay versus what is too much. I don't know that we've figured that out yet. I've seen a very wide array of charges from different companies trying to figure that out.
Yeah. Well, it's happening on both sides, right? Because I remember back when you could buy server licensing, and they did by host, right? And then what people ended up doing was they started stuffing cores into these servers.
Mhm.
So you could get a license for whatever flat rate, but people were, putting 128 cores into a server. And they're getting way more processing power out of these servers. And then, the company came back and said, hey, we're going to charge per core now. And it's like, okay, well, now there's a core minimum, right? So now you have to have at least a minimum of so many cores to even license the server. And then what ended up happening is people that weren't running those cores, I think it was like 16 or 18 cores per socket, they were getting charged for those 16 or 18, even if they might have had only 4 cores, right? So it's kind of like this ebb and flow of the way that the money transfers. And I kind of feel like at some point with all the push for agentic AI, or just like you guys were talking about earlier with the API stuff, there will be people making decisions that will impact budgets, right? Very similar to the server licensing story. So
yeah, I guess the moral of the story here is, if you're a vendor and you're watching this, be careful on how you price yourself in this market, because customers will be turned off by, excessive pricing, and then your competitors are going to be out there trying to cut down on that price as well. So hopefully we're going to have a competitive market where we keep prices where they should be. I think that you definitely have to make money to pay for this service, and it should be a part of your product, but be careful how you price it so that you don't really, segregate your buyers into different categories of who wants it and who can afford it.
Yeah, but I mean, you look at our security budgets, right? It's not like you have unlimited money. So a lot of times when you go in and try to get additional funding because you're going to boost productivity, that's not even, I would say within a security team, yeah, that you could probably make that case. But a lot of times it's hard to get, the investment to then generate the actual boost in productivity. I don't know how many leaders are actually mapping that back today. Even down to the analyst level, right? I'd like to have this conversation with even the people doing the work, because think about this. If you're a security analyst, you're working inside of a SOC, do you think about your productivity today, right? Maybe you're tracking how many tickets you deal with every day, how many tickets you deal with over time, but we know that not every ticket is created equal. So you may get like one celebrity ticket that you save the world, you save the company, and that should be, a lot bigger in value versus all these mundane, smaller tickets that you're working on. But if you're a SOC analyst, do you ever think about what value you provide to the company? And if you're a leader, do you tell your team, here's the value that you provide to your company? Do you celebrate those? I think those are some small things that we just don't think about within our field. We kind of just put our heads down, we look at what we need to do, and we go do it. But from a business standpoint, if I can create a script that makes this work a lot faster and be more productive, I want to be able to go and have the team do that and then celebrate it and then measure it over time. So I think those measurements and those metrics are huge, especially when it comes to budgeting, because you can go back and show, hey, we invested in this tool or this process and we got this value of 10x return. That's a really powerful conversation when you get to the boardroom.
Just maybe a side note, if you're gonna, write those down, put a copy in your own email and send it to yourself. I had a buddy tell me this like years ago, where he said, hey, you should always have a special folder on your computer for like wins or things like that, things that you've done over your career, that you just kind of like write a note to yourself and send it and just drop it in this folder. Because most of the time, like when people do these things, they don't really think twice about it. And then when it comes to, writing them down for the resume, or not even their resume, but more so like their yearly review, it's really hard to remember, like if you're in the trenches all day, all the things that you've done over the last, 365 days, that it's always good to have that copy or a note to yourself. And I've actually done it, and I've kind of gone back to this folder a couple of times. Like, oh yeah, I remember doing that. Oh yeah, I remember that. Right? You kind of lose sight of it. But then when it comes to either asking for a promotion, asking for a raise, I know a lot of people that listen are kind of in that 24 to 40, I believe, age group, based on like the YouTube stats. So really important. And I know I'm heading over 40 soon. So for the youngins out there listening, and I'm sure you guys have had something similar, but I just wanted to add that because it came to mind when you were talking about it, Damian.
I had a folder called notable incidents in my inbox that I kept all the important and interesting cases that my team worked over my career. And the reason for that is at the end of the 6 months, when you're trying to put together a board deck of all the cool stuff you've done, it's hard to think about it right off the top of your head. And so if you keep a track of that over the year and you just drop an email or something in that folder, you can, oh yeah, I remember that case. It was super important and we did something great there. And we can kind of use that in the boardroom to talk about all of the great things we're doing. It's so important because I know a lot of people, Fern, in that age group that you just talked about, who are not exactly braggadocious. They don't want to talk about themselves. They think it's actually, a bad thing to talk about the good things they're doing. So if you, no matter where you are in your career, keep a folder of all your wins, all the cool cases that you worked on, all the contributions you've done, all the acknowledgments you've gotten, maybe an award or recognition in the company. Just keep all of that together because you will need it and it'll come in handy when you least expect it.
I was going to bring it back to the account takeover, right? I think there's opportunity here for you to go back and have an impact right now on your personal life and your organizations that you may work at, to be able to go and inventory, right, tokens that are out there. And then here's a perfect example that you could put into that accomplishment folder. You could come back and say, I eliminated X number of accounts that were dormant, or discovered unused tokens that were sitting in our environment over the past year. And so when you're putting those types of accomplishments in these folders, in your inbox, in your notes, wherever you put them, it's always good to have some stats behind that, right? It's always easier to back it up with information that says, here's a number of accounts that I was able to get rid of because they're no longer used. And here's the attack surface that just changed, right? Just be able to talk about that from a statistics perspective, metrics. It's very data-driven instead of emotional. And that way, when you have these results, nobody can really go back and refute your numbers. So that's the one input I'd give you, especially since we're talking about account takeovers today. Focus there, right? I think there's a lot of episodes we talk about other things that you can take back into your organization or into your personal life, and still, even if you don't go out and actually do it yourself, talking about it sometimes or bringing it up to your team is already a win.
Yeah, for sure. Because a lot of times things get done and no one knows about it. The more you talk about it, the more people remember it, right? I think that's probably one of the biggest issues with wins is if no one saw it happen, no one actually knows. It's kind of like if a tree falls, does it make it sound? Right. So I've got maybe one last question, and it goes back to the account takeover, kind of like the topic for today's episode. There is a stat, we'll say a forecast, that in 2026, passkey adoption will increase the likelihood of an account takeover by 40% if it's not passed right. So maybe the forward-looking question is, if people are looking into passkey or passwordless or kind of strengthening their zero trust models or their zero trust environment, and they start going this direction, maybe what are some of the things that people are thinking about?
You know that Gartner has a whole magic quadrant called ITDR.
No.
I think it stands for identity detection and threat response, I think. Well, we can look it up and put the link below. But so there's a whole magic quadrant on identity threat detection. If you're, passkeys are similar to all of these other tokens, where it makes it easier for users because you don't have to go through that manual MFA. I remember when I first had my first MFA token, it was that RSA token. You remember those, Troy, where you'd have to carry the actual fob, and they would just rotate the number every 60 seconds. And then hackers got the algorithm to that. And so that kind of made those obsolete. But back in the day, that's what you had to carry, and you had to punch those in. And now we have the FIDO2, which is a lot easier. You just plug that into your USB and tap the button. And sometimes, when you have them on your laptop, you accidentally hit it. And when somebody puts their certificate in your Slack channel by accident, because it always has that unique, string. So we're kind of moving down that path of, well, if you have all these tokens, you have all these devices, what is going to make the attackers, go after? And I think passkeys naturally sit within your computer or your phone. So if your phone gets stolen, or your Google account gets popped, and that's your passkey, you're at a greater risk, right? So I don't know what the right answer is for these. Passwordless isn't really passwordless. It just means that you don't actually enter in your password, but there's some token associated with that. I'm not a big fan of the whole QR code, because I don't know if that QR code is legitimate sometimes. Right? What if somebody had hacked the TV in the hotel room, and then it displays a malicious QR code every single time? And so there's always going to be these things you have to think about from, just a state of having basic paranoia, the what if, so that you can protect yourself and protect your organization. We have always said there's convenience, but at what risk, right? So you're giving the user some convenience, but you're also putting the organization at some risk. And so that business decision, that conversation has to happen. Passkeys increasing, these account takeovers, I could see that, right? I could see that becoming a problem. I look at how much information, I don't know if you guys have ever looked at how much information's on you personally on the dark web. But there's a lot of, companies that will go out there and try to find those for you and remove them. I personally use one, so I think they're useful. But that information that's out there, like they most likely have personal information about you. They might have your family members, so they could potentially come up with your mother's maiden name. That used to be the default for that passcode on the phone, right? I don't know if the people actually still use that, but now it's, what street did you grow up on when you were a kid? And maybe that's in there as well. Maybe your first pet's name. I don't know. These guys collect a ton of data. Fern, you get access to this data through some of these sales databases. I mean, maybe you should look up Troy and I to tell us what information is in there on us.
How do you know I haven't already done that? What's interesting is a lot of these tools have it where email addresses are in there, right? Old email addresses. I've seen some where, you're looking for information. It's like, you can look up this account or this person, and it has stuff from, years ago, right? It has like emails from like 2 or 3 employers back. Obviously they're not good anymore, but they're just there as kind of like there. But I've seen a lot of personal. I've seen a lot of what's interesting to me is a lot of non-work related information is in these tools. Usually personal email, personal phone is the big one. But there's a lot of stuff out there. I
mean, but that's a problem though, right? Because if you're using questions, like personal questions, as a second factor just to verify who you are, most likely that information is already out there. Mm-hmm. So that's a scary part. How many people do those crazy surveys and questionnaires, right? We talked about this before too, where it asks you for personal information so that they can give you your, what your superhero name should be.
Yeah, find your Disney princess name on Facebook.
Yeah.
Just put in your mother's maiden name and your first pet and your car and your color and where'd you go to high school, street you grew up on.
And people still fall for that.
People fall for this all the time. Even in my own family, I tell people, don't do these things. And then I see a family member posted on Facebook, here's my Disney princess name. Like, oh my God.
But how do you expect to have a legitimate, like, Disney princess name if it's not tied to your unique information? Come on, Troy.
Yeah. just ask AI, because it probably knows a lot about you already.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to say about the Netflix thing at the hotel, like I took that risk, but I got to tell you, Stranger Things season 5 is fire, so it was worth it.
Oh yeah.
There's only 4 episodes out right now, and then the rest will drop on Christmas, or there'll be some in Christmas and some in the New Year. But I'm telling you what, this is probably the best season ever.
Yeah, I've never watched it. I told you guys that, so I'm gonna have to go and binge watch from season 1, I guess.
Yeah, I think Damian was talking about how the last thumbnail was like, "Come on, bro, this is no good." Like, dude, this is only like the biggest show in history. Like, you got to watch it.
Coming from the guy that never watched Breaking Bad.
So this is your winter break recommendations from the two of us: Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul, and Stranger Things. If you watch those, you'll be good. But do Stranger Things first, because that's more current. But they're on season 5 now, so you've got a lot of binge watching to do.
All right, we got sidetracked.
I think that mostly covers it for today. We covered a lot of different things, right? Mostly account takeover topic, but we kind of got into the non-human identity related pricing stuff. We talked about pricing in general, information that is out there that people don't want to have out there, and people have access to it.
Why don't we end off with just some basic recommendations, right, for the average user, and just so you can hopefully avoid some of this account takeover stuff. One of them would be don't just ignore those emails that come in. Don't click on them. So if somebody's trying to reset your password for real, maybe you should go and investigate it out of band so that you can stop that early, because you don't want somebody taking over your Google account or your phone, right, your SIM, and swapping that. There's also recommendations of connecting to things like public Wi-Fi without a secure connection. I think anything in that open traffic could be potentially viewed. I used to, I would say, this is going to be 10 years ago now, I would sit in the airport with Wireshark and sniff the traffic and look for passwords. That would be what I would do in the airport to kill time. I'm sure people still do that, right? So if you have anything in open text that's not encrypted, probably visible. What's another way? Those free USB chargers.
Juice jacking.
Juice jacking. How many people are searching the airport and searching, and just at conferences too, right? If you see these free chargers for your phone, do you actually use them? Because that may copy it and clone your device and all the data on it. I don't know. I think there are a bunch more, Fern, you probably saw, but I mean that's basic stuff, right? And we just talked about don't answer those surveys or those questionnaires that give you your Disney princess names. That's just not worth the risk to put all your personal information out there.
Kind of went over something that came out recently around stopping the hack lore. I don't know who published it. It might have just been a bunch of like CISOs. I saw that it was published by one person, and then a lot of other people kind of followed up on it. As far as like public Wi-Fi, but essentially they're saying QR codes aren't as malicious as people say. Public Wi-Fi. What else was there? Juice jacking was on there. I think there was a couple more, but I think at the end of the day, the things that really matter is if you're going to use public Wi-Fi, just use a VPN that you trust. Make sure that whatever traffic is going through, like Damian said, it is an open text, and that you can actually have it encrypted, so that way no one can see it. Ideally,
Well, I I don't know if I agree with QR codes not being as malicious as most people think. That's actually a really easy way to get somebody to go to a malicious site and get credentials. And so if you think about, let's say the restaurant, right? Because most restaurants today, they may have a QR code. Scan this and you can order. You can see the menu. So they don't actually have to give you a physical menu. These all started during COVID because they didn't want to give you somebody else's germs and they want to sanitize the physical menus. But if you were to just replace that, just get a sticker, put it on top, and somebody scans that, now you could pretend to be the restaurant. You can even serve up the same menu, but then ask them to log in. Let's say, hey, for faster checkout, click here to log into your Google or Apple account or Facebook account so that we know who you are and we could automatically, populate the order form, whatever. Just make it easier for you. And now you log in and they've got your credentials. That's kind of scary, right? So, and you would not even know. So you started off this show by saying, hey, your Google account just got popped and you didn't even click a link. Well, you don't think you did, but maybe somewhere along the line, somebody had inserted something. It still took you to where you wanted to go, but in between, they just skimmed the data off the top.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on that because I was thinking the same thing. Like there's so much opportunity for people to get popped with a QR code. What I did find interesting though was there was a large reseller where they had their CIO or someone talking, and he was talking about juice jacking at the airport. It's like how to stay safe when you're traveling. And I'm watching this thing for it's like 15, 20 seconds, and the person's like 100% committed to saying, don't ever plug in anything at the airport. And I'm like, man, you got to see some of these past episodes that we've done. or you've got to talk to Troy, because Troy and I went back and forth a few episodes back about this specifically with juice jacking. And I feel much better about it. But there's a lot of people out there kind of spreading fear. So if you're not looking we're not looking to spread fear, but the thing is some of these things are real, some of these things aren't. And the only way to find out is to listen to the next episode. Or I don't know about the next episode, but keep listening to all of our episodes.
Scan this QR code right here to subscribe.
Yeah. And I guess, Troy, you got anything to add?
No, I think the only last thing to mention is if you get bombarded with MFA prompts that you didn't ask for, let somebody know, because that's a sign that you are getting compromised.
Okay. Closing thoughts, Damian? I know you kind of said a few things about the QR code, but this is the final roundup.
No, I mean, obviously, if your account's taken over, personally, that's a pain in the ass. I know Fern kind of downplayed it in the beginning, but quite honestly, it's really hard to recover from that. It's not like you can go and get some of your personal accounts reinstated. It's very, very difficult. But on the corporate side, just be vigilant, right? Try to figure out where all your identities are, whether they're human or non-human, what they have access to, something to think about as you strengthen your security posture.
And I guess with that, we'll see you next week.